Good evening, everybody. I welcome you to the November 19, 2019 meeting of the Board of Selectmen. I am calling us to order and moving to the approval of the minutes. I had a chance to take a look at them. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts.
I have reviewed the minutes, and I would move for their approval.
Since I was absent,
I will second them.
Thanks.
All those in favor of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I'm just going to abstain, Heidi.
Okay. Public comment for items not on the agenda this evening. Seeing none, I move to the joint session with the Sewer Commission to fill a vacancy on the commission, and I call Bob Higgins and Kirk Schultz to the table to join us. So, for those of you who don't know, the Sewer Commission is an elected commission. And when a vacancy occurs on an elected commission, there's actually a law in Massachusetts that talks about how that vacancy gets filled prior to an election, which this year will take place in April. So what we're doing tonight is fulfilling our statutory obligation to meet in a joint session with the Sewer Commission to appoint this vacancy. The vacancy will be for the unexpired term ending on the election date in April. So even though it's just a short period of time, the Sewer Commission is only 3 members, and I'm sure you would welcome some help, right?
Yes, thank you.
So we did have 2 candidates who submitted talent bank applications. We'll talk to each of them tonight. And what I'd ask us to do, I guess, is, since you and Kirk are the experts, we'd like to start the questioning with you. What we've done, you've probably seen it in the past, we've tried to stick to sort of the same questions for each of the 2 applicants, so you sort of have some fairness in their oral presentations tonight. I'd ask each of you to maybe ask 2 questions, and Joe, Mary, and I will ask a question each, and then we will move on to the next applicant. I think we'll start out by maybe having them come to the podium first, tell us a little bit about themselves and their interest in the Sewer Commission, and then move into questioning by you gentlemen, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In a moment, we have to open our meeting also.
Good point.
Okay.
7:04.
Okay, 7:04. Okay, the only item on the agenda is the appointment this evening.
Great. So the Sewer Commission has been called
We
to
are
order.
open.
Okay. So
Great.
invite Thomas Roby in.
Thomas Roby first.
Yep. He was first in my pile. Mr. Roby, thanks for joining us tonight. Let me take a minute and kind of go over the process so that you understand how we'll proceed. If you could state your name and address for the record and maybe take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and why you're interested in the Sewer Commission. And then, as I was explaining to the public before you entered the room, this joint session tonight is part of our statutory responsibility to meet in joint session with the Sewer Commission in order to fill a seat for an elected commission. So, so Bob and Kirk will ask a couple questions, Mary, Joe, and I will ask you a question, and then you are, we'd ask you to wait in the hall while we interview the other applicant. You can stay, because we will deliberate this position after we hear from both of you. You're also free to go home, and we can contact you tomorrow with the results. So okay. Either way, we've had folks stay, we've had folks go home. Whatever works for you will work for us.
Okay. And it won't be held against you, no matter what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a good point. So take it away. If you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name is Thomas Roby. I just moved. We moved to Hingham about last December, so we're approaching being a year in Hingham. We live on 301 Rockland Street, me and my wife. A little bit about myself. I grew up in the Merrimack Valley. Went to Merrimack College, graduated Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. After graduating, I spent a year in design on the coastal engineering, and then from there I wanted to move into more in the construction engineering part. From there I went to work for Cashman for 2 years, which they've been in the harbor here, so. And then from there I wanted to pursue some more sort of heavy civil work. I kind of moved around a little bit, and I landed at J. D'Amico, which kind of opened me up to utility construction, water, sewer, drain, infrastructure. I mean, we do a lot of work. Primarily our work is water, sewer, and drain for various municipalities throughout the greater Boston area. And when I saw this come up, I have an interest in it, and I don't know much about it, and I want to learn more about it. So that's kind of where I stand.
Great, thank you so much. Kirk and Bob?
Welcome, of course. You're working for D'Amico. Have you done other sewer projects and water projects, pumping stations, and any of that stuff? Have you been involved in any of those?
I haven't been involved in any pumping station work, but this year we finished off. We did a sewer system in Marlboro that we had started last year. We finished it off this year. It was pretty interesting. We were 20 feet deep, blasting, putting in gravity sewer. Currently, we have 2 crews working in Waltham, putting in water, and we are in Taunton doing drainage infrastructure repairs. So my experience is growing.
Sounds like it. We meet basically once a month on Tuesdays preferably, and some of the dates get moved around and so forth and so on. You get home by the 7 o'clock hour in time to...
Yeah, I'm home latest 5:30, so shouldn't be a problem.
So, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kirk?
Kirk Schultz. You know, what's interesting is that both Bob and I went through this very process that you're going through now. For the Selectmen and the Sewer Commission, and we're both here. My 2 questions. First is the Sewer Commission, we run a business.
Mm-hmm.
We have customers. And so what is your experience with customer service?
In terms of customer service, I mean, when we work for the public, for a municipality, I mean, we're constantly, we're dealing with the public every day. We're not customer service in terms of we're not really selling them anything, but we still kind of have to, watch out for them and, look out for them and let them know what we're doing. And, if they need help with anything, we help them out, such as, they got to get their kids to school. We got to make sure the area is safe and clear for them to get through and pass. So.
My second question, and maybe you already mentioned it, have you done any community service previous that you have experience with dealing with the public and governance boards, or is this going to be your first foray into this?
This is my first foray.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Joe?
Well, you asked about community service, and I thought you were sort of asking, like, as part of an incarceration release. But I wanted to follow up on one of your questions, Kirk, in terms of recognizing that this is a business, and one of the important functions of the business is billing. And the Sewer Commission is responsible for getting bills out and making sure that the money comes in. And so with respect to the financial aspect of the business, do you have experience that relates to that?
I will say not much. The most financial stuff that I have experience with is in terms of when we get paid on a monthly basis for the work that we do. I keep track of all the quantities that we do so that we can get paid and, make sure that what the inspector has for quantities agree with what I have, and then we submit it for payment. So not a whole lot, but
okay, great.
In terms of tracking costs and quantities, yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Mary?
Welcome to Hingham.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for volunteering to serve in the community. My question, we're interviewing right now to fill an unexpired term, but whoever is appointed this evening, that seat will be up for election in the town elections in the spring. Knowing how important continuity is, my question is that if you're appointed to this position tonight, would you seek re-election in the town election, which is, again, next April?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
right, and I'm going to violate my rule because I have actually two quick questions. One is...
Chair's prerogative.
Yeah, or something. So one of the things is everybody's sort of alluding to is the sewer commission or the sewer department as a business, and one of the important components of maintaining the business is maintaining the capital infrastructure. So it sounds like you're familiar with capital infrastructure repair. And I just wonder if you've had any experience with capital planning efforts?
Not so much. I think sort of getting into something like this can
Yep.
broaden that horizon,
Yep.
which is kind of why I'm interested in it, to kind of bring everything full circle for me. I kind of work on just one end of it, but there's also the planning and stuff.
Yeah.
The project that I'm on was probably planned 2 years ago, kind
Right.
of thing. So
Right, excellent.
seeing that process is interesting to me.
Okay, great. And my cheating question is, I think you've got a great resume. You're good on your feet tonight, to present with a great demeanor. I'm just wondering if this doesn't work out, this particular appointment doesn't work out, would you be open to other committee appointments potentially in the town?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on?
I think I'm all set.
All right, well, listen, like Mary said, we really appreciate you stepping up, particularly stepping up so soon after moving to Hingham and being with us tonight, and we will interview the next applicant and then move to deliberations.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
So we have Stephen Harold next. Mr. Harold, thanks for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. If you don't mind joining us at the podium. Mr. Harold, just take a minute to describe how we'll proceed from here, and then ask you to make maybe some opening remarks so we can get to know you a little bit before we ask our questions. But as I indicated to your predecessor, part of what we're doing tonight is undertaking our statutory role in the appointment of a vacancy on an elected board in a joint session with the Sewer Commission. How we'll proceed tonight is ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then the members of the Sewer Commission will ask you a couple questions, we'll ask you a couple questions, and then we will proceed to deliberations. You are welcome to stay for the deliberative part of the meeting, or you can go home, and we will call you tomorrow, and as Joe said before, it won't be held against you if you decide to head on home. We really appreciate you making the time to be here tonight, and without further ado, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and why you're interested in the Sewer Commission, or returning to the Sewer Commission.
Well, originally, I was appointed by the Selectmen to finish out a term and then to run for office, which I did, and was elected, and served with, these commissioners here. Unfortunately, I just basically got a broken foot that took me out of commission for not driving, and for almost a year, and I didn't think it was fair to just let it sit there, and, that's why I resigned. So if you got somebody appointed, it's fine. But, I served on the State Plumbing Board for almost 8 years as the master plumber. I also served as vice chairman of Board of Appeals in Quincy. So I've served on boards and enjoyed it, and that's when I came here, there was an opening, even though I was almost just here a year when I was appointed. And that's basically, I've served on some boards, and I enjoyed Kurt and Bob and their experience, because I'm sort of the younger guy, and they've been around a little bit. So, and they asked me a couple of times if once I feel better, will you come back? And that's one of the reasons why I put my name back in there. I want to finish my term. And
Great. Thank you. So without further ado, Mr. Chairman?
Hi, Steve. Actually, we had a tremendously good experience with Steve on the board because of his plumbing background and his skill and his knowledge. Plumbers in general are responsible, or partly responsible for the health of the community in sewer and water. They're part of the cross-connection program in the community where they repair and install by permit devices that need to be installed and repaired and serviced. And they also get permitting for the plumbing in the house to see that it's correct, that there's no interconnection between water and sewer, sewer and water. So we felt that Steve brings something unique to our board, and he's been very helpful. And I would hope that we could get Steve back, to be honest with you. That's my personal opinion from being on this commission for a number of years. He does an excellent job, and that's about it.
Okay, do you have any questions?
Nope.
Okay. Kirk, questions?
I tried to have questions that would be applicable to both. And so the first one, because he hasn't mentioned it, is I asked the other candidate, I'm going to ask you, we're a business and we have customers. We want to make sure our customers are happy. What's your customer service experience?
As far as, what do you mean, my own business?
Your own business.
Well, we do a lot of work for Home Serve, which is a facility that goes to homeowners and has an insurance policy about doing repairs. And we were asked to, this week, to be on This Old House, doing a series, which one of my guys, John, who's worked with me for 30 years, did the series yesterday and talked about what services and stuff, and Home Serve picked us because, we try to do our best for our customers.
That's excellent.
So as far as your customer service, how many employees?
I have 3 employees.
And the second you actually covered, I was going to ask about municipal experience, and I'm familiar with the fact that you're on the plumbing board. So just having this opportunity, I'll say this, I'm glad you're healthy.
Well, I'm glad I am too. So.
It's
It's been 16 months of, honey, can you drive me here?
You have to be really nice.
We have the drive, so.
Joe, any questions?
Yes. You've been on this board, you're off, and you've got other board experience. Do you have any suggestions for how the Sewer Commission might improve its operations?
Well, I think it's sort of getting to know a lot more, about, certain things that go on. We don't meet as often as we should, but it's always, get more information. I mean, in the plumbing board, you would get a whole thing of what the agenda was. In the state, on the Board of Appeals in Quincy, I get this huge envelope like this, and it would list all the things. And I used to drive around on Sunday morning and look at all the variances and all the stuff and have the knowledge. Just if we were a little more data coming from the people that put the stuff out of the sewer, sewer guys and stuff, but superintendents, it's just a little bit more information. I feel much more comfortable because I used to get a ton of that, and I enjoyed just driving around looking at, geez, that house, this driveway. Oh, well, don't worry about the cut-in for that driveway. They already did it, So it was, for me, it's just more information from Public Works,
Thank you.
Mary?
It's nice to see you again, and thank you for both making a decision to focus on your health, and thank you for returning to continue to serve the town. My question is that this is a term that will expire in this kind of next election cycle. Would it be your intention to then seek re-election?
Yes.
Okay, and since the chair asked one extra question, as you think about a next term, what would you hope to accomplish as a commission?
As a commission, just working with everybody to make, smooth things and doing what the, if a rate needs to be increased, or this has to be done, or, just looking at everything, make the best for the town.
Thank you.
Great. And Mr. Harold, I asked the prior applicant about kind of experience with capital planning. Is the capital planning or care of the infrastructure, is that part of sewer commission deliberations, and what's your view on the maintenance of the sewer system?
Well, they do a job, I guess, they're about inspecting houses and stuff for overruns and stuff, and they have that plan in place where, it's just going to take a long time, We work on, on the neighborhood development side in the city. We do a lot of sewer jobs, a lot of water jobs, but, they're subbed out to a general contractor that's licensed and bonded, like in this town here.
Yep.
But they have a program for, the water situation, or, for the sewer system that goes into Hull and into Weymouth.
Yep. Okay.
Trying to lower that.
Okay. And with your activities, if you weren't selected to return to the sewer commission, would you be interested in serving on any other committees in town?
Yeah, if something else come up that would, that was interested in, or something to, I'm a contractor and stuff, so
Great. Well, we appreciate your long service to the town and to your profession, and we appreciate you being with us tonight. So we're going to take a few minutes and deliberate. You can join us, or we'll give you a ring tomorrow and let you know.
I'll sit and join you.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll start with you and Kirk. Maybe give us your assessments of the candidates. We'll give our assessments of the candidates, and then I'll open it up for discussion from the public. Oh, sure, sorry, Bob.
Thank you.
So the way the next phase of the process will unfold is the members of the Sewer Commission will give impressions of the candidates that have presented tonight. We'll give our impressions of the candidates who presented tonight. I'll ask the public if they have any questions or comments with respect to the process or the candidates, and then I would open it up for a motion to the extent people feel like they're ready to vote tonight, if that sounds okay to everybody. All right. Mr. Chairman, if you'd like
Thank
to
you.
proceed.
Both candidates, of course, are very well qualified, I think, and it's a very difficult decision that we have to make, not just for the commission, but I think for the town also. We try to attract young people and people with skill, that we're looking for, and both these gentlemen have significant skills that we can use. It's hard to decide, but I'm willing to make a vote for either of the two. I have my mind made up.
Okay. Kirk?
We have weaknesses on the sewer commission. One of the reasons it was so imperative to get our third member back is we have a lot of work to do that we haven't done. And we have an issue with the intermunicipal agreement and the way that is actually functioning at the sewer commission with the DPW, and it's something that Tom is familiar with. We'll resolve that, but it's something with only two people we haven't been able to go there because Bob and I think a little differently.
Yeah,
And so that's a significant hurdle. So have somebody that's going to join us that has that municipal kind of oversight, I think is helpful to be able to, to guide us in a long-term governance structure. That's what I'm looking for in that regard. And the other aspect, and Karen, you brought it up, and I didn't want to go to capital planning because I know that Steve has experience because he's been with us in the capital planning for the sewer commission. But that's another issue that for a long time the sewer commission hadn't put a lot of thought into. And it's only been recently that the capital plans has been identified going before the town meeting and in a more significant way, or actually at all, to have a capital plan. And it's been a delightful experience the way we've been doing it, but to get more into the nitty-gritty, not just with I&I infiltration and inflow, but also structural maintenance of the infrastructure we have, because we've had a number of sewer breaks this past year, significant in the couple that we've had. So it's been a long-term process, and one of the reasons that I got onto the sewer commission was to help us through that. And we worked very well with Steve. I'm probably more inclined in that regard. I think that would be natural, and because of the experience I have with him. And so I look forward to hearing what the selectmen have to say, because this is really more your alley, personnel, and ours is more the governance of the sewer commission, the sewer program.
Madam Chair, can I just make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
About the infrastructure and capital planning?
Yeah.
I've been on the sewer commission for about 8 to 10 years. Okay. And the first year I was on the sewer commission, the capital planning was close to zero in the sewer commission, a 50-year-old system, utility system, with no capital updating, no recapitalization facilities, pumping stations and stuff. And we've spent millions of dollars doing just that in the last 10 years, upgrading pumping stations, replacing some service pipelines, some mains. We have a ways to go yet, but you know what? We're trying to go forward, and we have been going forward with a 5-year plan. We work with the department, the sewer department. The superintendent over there prepares the budget, the annual budget, and we have a review period. And from time to time, we make suggestions as to what we'd like to see. You know, we'd really like to see this, that, and the next thing. And the system works very well, but I can assure you, over the last 10 years, we've put some money in the ground, not only in capital, but also in the I&I. We've been banging away at that I&I, you know, and that's very important, because within a few years, we're going to be at a level where we will be forced to maybe shut down the sewer system in the North Sewer District. We're within that 80% where we really have to really do something. And the Way River Sewer District is pretty good, and as I explained now, that intermunicipal agreement that we have with Hull and Cohasset is coming up. And I can't get into the weeds right now, but we're looking at some options here. Okay?
Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Suspend additional hookups.
Yes.
Okay.
Not shutting down.
Okay, yeah, and we're getting a little bit off track. We're gonna move on. Joe?
You know, clearly, I think both candidates are very impressive, and they're both very likable. I think, do you prefer Tom or Thomas?
Tom's fine.
Tom. You, I think, have the uphill battle, because we've got someone in Steve who has the experience, who's actually elected to this position, and I think it would, in my view, take a lot for me to want to undo what the electorate did in putting him into this position to begin with. At the same time, you are very impressive, and I think you were asked at least once whether or not you'd be open to serving on other boards, because I think your talent would serve the town well. But I think from what I've heard, I would want to reappoint Steve.
Okay. Mary?
Yeah, I would be delighted to appoint either candidate, and we're so lucky in this town that we have so many people that step forward. I think I would concur with my colleague that the citizens of the town of Hingham have voted for Mr. Harold in the past, but Mr. Roby, I'd echo my colleague's comments. You know, we have about 40 different boards and committees in the town, and some of them are elected positions like the sewer, and others are appointed. And the good news with the appointed ones is that you don't have to have an interview on TV. You don't have to run for office, but there are a lot of really important things, and I'm excited about your engineering background, because we have a lot of engineering type we have a lot of committees in this town that are doing a lot of work. We have a lot of capital projects going on, and oftentimes, in particular, we need somebody with a civil engineering background, somebody who can kind of like translate what the engineers of the world are saying into language that the regular citizens can kind of understand. And not really sure what's going to happen with the vote, but I would say whoever's not appointed tonight is going to get a phone call tomorrow from our office letting you know about some other volunteer opportunities that are available, because both of you have skills that, that would really be able to help the town as we move forward. And I think, Mr. Harold, you've seen that volunteering for the town is enjoyable, and it's a great way to kind of solidify the roots that we have in the community.
Yep, and, I'm not going to say anything new, other than, I feel badly that there aren't 4 members on the sewer commission, because you would both, I think, be a tremendous asset to that position. And I do agree with Mary, there are immediate needs on town committees for this skill set. So whatever happens tonight, I think you should anticipate in a few days that we will reach out to one or the other of you, because it's hard to find this. It's hard to find this particular skill set, and it's so necessary for some of the important work that we're doing across the town.
Is it really only 40? It feels like 100.
I don't think you're supposed to say that out loud.
I know, yeah, I think you're right.
Would anybody like to make a motion?
Before you do that, do you want to take any
Oh,
comments?
yep, I always forget that. Comments or questions from the public? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion if someone would care to make one.
With the commission, sewer commission?
I would vote for Steve Harrell, please.
So we would,
Make a motion to vote for Steve Harrell.
So there's a motion to appoint Steve Harold. Is there a second to the motion?
second?
Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Do we have to do a roll call?
Oh, do we have to
Sounds
do a
like they
roll
wanted
call
you to
vote?
do a
I
roll
think we
call.
need a roll call.
All right, roll call vote.
Kirk Schultz, yes.
Bob Higgins, yes.
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 All right, thank you. Thank you both for
you.
being here tonight. And Mr. Roby, stay by your phone.
Exactly.
I have something particular in mind.
You can adjourn.
Okay, make a motion to adjourn the sewer commission
Adjourned
at
at 7:35.
7:35. All those in
Thank you.
favor?
Excellent.
Unless
Thanks
they
for
have more
being here.
questions for us, I
Oh,
doubt they have.
if there are more questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
We're
for
all
you.
set for tonight, but
Okay,
it doesn't let you off the hot seat forever. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank
Appreciate you
you.
coming in.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, next up is the Traffic Committee. A recommendation for a stop sign. Mr. Kilroy. Good evening, how are you? I feel like the Traffic Committee's been busy.
I can hand them up.
Just to help
Yep.
explain things.
So just so everybody knows, there's been a recommendation from the Traffic Committee to install a stop sign at Wompatuck, Kimball Beach, and Foley Beach roads. And we'll hear from Sergeant Kilroy representing the Traffic Committee.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we did receive, actually, I believe the request came to your office in July from a resident of the area who wanted a stop sign installation at the intersection of Wompatuck and Kimball Beach. Currently, as it sits, there are 2 stop signs there, one on Kimball, one on Foley, and she had asked us to look into it. So the committee did meet on September 26th, discussed it. We also went out and took a look at it. I went down there in the morning when her biggest concerns were, sat there, observed the kids walking to school, et cetera. Did feel as though it fit the requirement, brought it back to the members of the committee, talked to them about it, with some issues on restricted view. The other issue that I kind of noticed that, again, it's not a high crash volume situation there. However, I don't see how it can be anything but safer with the installation of it. And one of the questions we did have opposition to was regards to the common sense of things, and people should be using common sense, et cetera. The issue I had is that in almost 20 years in policing, the minute we rely on common sense to be safe, it's not going to happen. And I understand the residents are very familiar with the area. However, with the influx of the Amazon drivers, all these other delivery services, et cetera, they don't know the area as well as all the residents do. So I think many people would think it's a no-brainer to just kind of slow there, but the other issue in one of the pictures I attached was it has orange arrows on it. We're kind of fortunate no one's collided there, but if you're on Wompatuck and you want to go straight across to Foley Beach, there's nothing saying you can't do that, and if a car is coming down Wompatuck the other direction, it'll be an interesting one to figure out who's at fault. Because there's, and again, it's just pure luck that, it's not a rush hour situation there. So we thought that it was a good idea, and it merited an installation of it. And we also went out and met with the DPW on site and spoke to them regarding how we would go about it. I also spoke to the neighbor at number 30, who the stop sign would be in front of their house. I spoke to their daughter. She said she would pass it on to her parents. I left her my business card. They said her parents were very easygoing and probably wouldn't have an issue with it. I never heard back from them. So
Okay.
it seems as though things should be pretty good with that.
Okay.
You see any downside from a traffic flow standpoint, or any concerns there?
To be honest, I don't. I don't think anyone's going to be inconvenienced by it. And again, I hate to put the convenience factor with the safety factor.
Sure.
So I don't see any downfall, downside of it, only safer.
That's really all I had.
Mary?
I just mentioned to people, we get things from people, can we have a stop sign here or a traffic light there? And just for people who aren't aware, we have a traffic committee. It's made up of volunteers and members of our town administration, meet monthly. This came from a resident, so this is kind of how this works. If you have an issue, it's heard in front of the traffic committee and they make recommendations. So I view coming here tonight as an indication that process works.
Yes, ma'am.
I read in the packet that there was a letter from someone who thought that maybe this wasn't necessary, but I think listening to your explanation, that makes sense to me. In particular, I think as you mentioned, with all the home delivery and things that take place, there are a lot of vehicles and new drivers in a lot of our neighborhoods, and a lot of them drive very fast. And in that area, I know you're going straight, and if you go straight, the name of the road changes. That's always confusing to people. So a little clarity at this intersection seems like a good idea.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the notice, how does it work once it's installed so that people understand that it's there? When a new stop sign goes in, is there some period of?
We would talk, we would definitely put it out on our social media outlets as well. We talked about, for this stop sign in particular, we may actually, we'll install the stop sign, and then we'll potentially put one in the middle of the street as well, like a temporary sign.
Yeah.
Just to kind of, drive it home. We're gonna have officers out there also as an educational type measure, just to kind of set the message out there. Fortunately, unlike some of the other stop signs that affect people from all over, it's pretty isolated for the most part. So I think the residents will get the hang of it pretty quickly, but we'll be out there in an educational capacity as well.
Okay. I mean, I think that's sort of the point, is that you get used to kind of the traffic flow in your own neighborhood, and you're certainly not meaning to, blow through the stop sign, but
Sure.
I could, other people maybe, but I could anticipate that it may take a little bit to get used to. So I appreciate the fact that, you would be trying to create visibility around the stop sign as well as your presence, sort of educating folks.
Yes,
that this
the
is a
educational component is the most
traffic
important thing.
pattern. I mean, we've all read through the packet, we've heard the, kind of the argument that maybe we're overdoing things, but there doesn't seem to be any downside to traffic flow in that neighborhood, and I think it just only makes that intersection safer. Any questions from the public on this? Any further questions here?
Tom, did we get anything in the office concern? Okay.
Okay. I'd entertain a motion.
I will make the motion, and I will say the form of the motion is not as I expected, so I will follow the form of the motion. I move that the traffic rules and orders of the Town of Hingham adopted by the Board of Selectmen on May 31, 1939, and subsequent amendments thereto, be and hereby are further amended as follows. Stop sign, street stopped Wompatuck Road at the intersection of Kimball Beach Road and Foley Beach Road.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Sergeant, I just have to say before I leave that I had the privilege of being on the board that actually promoted you to sergeant, and it's nice to see you in a leadership role and doing a great job on this committee, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have the Fourth Amendment to the lease between the town and Vista Verde, which is more commonly known as the Greenside Grill at the South Shore Country Club. Joe, I don't know whether, I know you've spent some time with the lease, I don't know whether, or Tom, whether you want to make any comments about this process and the lease renewal tonight?
But this is the Fourth Amendment, which sounds like it's constitutional.
Yeah.
But the Fifth Amendment is not coming immediately. This is the amendment for the restaurant at the country club. It had been presented to us before, and I had raised concerns to make sure that there was appropriate oversight by the country club committee and by the town administrator, and there have been amendments to the lease which satisfy me, so I am prepared to proceed.
Great. Mary, any questions?
No questions.
Any comments or questions from the public with respect to the lease? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on the Vista Verde lease.
I'll make a motion that the Board of Selectmen enter into a Fourth Amendment to lease with Vista Verde Corporation in the form of the execution draft dated November 15th, 2019, for the premises located at the South Shore Country Club, subject to receipt by the board of an original of the Fourth Amendment duly executed by the Country Club Management Committee, tenant, and guarantor.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, and so we're back to the naming bylaw. You might recall a couple weeks ago, well, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we talked about the concept of putting together a group of folks that might take a look at the current naming bylaw to see if it continues to make sense, particularly in respect of public-private partnerships and private philanthropic support for municipal projects. Joe and I talked about it a couple weeks ago, and there were some additional concerns about the charge and even the task of reviewing the bylaw itself. We thought it would be best to have the full complement of the board so that we could make a decision one way or another as to whether it makes some sense to review the naming bylaw, particularly in the light of developments in the town since the bylaw was established. So, I think I've kind of said my piece on this, so I'd turn it over to, I don't know whether you want to lead off since you haven't had a chance to comment at all, or...
Sure. So, I watched the meeting that took place 2 weeks ago. Joe, I appreciated some of the questions that you had raised. It kind of got me thinking about some things. Since that time, I've had a conversation with one of the original members of the original committee. I've kind of done a little digging myself. I think that private fundraising could be really beneficial in this town. I don't think there's any disagreement on that. And I think that when naming, when, in 2010, when the naming bylaw was adopted by the town, I don't think we as a town were contemplating private-public partnerships on the scale that we are now. So I don't think this is a matter of making any judgment about the existing bylaw, but just to say, like with many things, we as a town have evolved. I went back and I looked in the advisory committee comment, and I found some of this a little helpful. I just want to read a couple highlights. This is from the 2010 town meeting, which adopted the bylaw. In June of 2009, the Hingham Board of Selectmen voted to create and charge a committee of 5 citizens to develop and recommend policies and procedures for naming municipal properties in Hingham, strongly considering the recommendations as an addition to the town bylaw and bringing the recommendations for consideration at the April 2010 town meeting. The committee, named in the fall of 2009, began its work by requesting naming policy information for all 351 Massachusetts cities and towns using the Mass Municipal Association listserv. 11 responded and were studied in detail. Site visits were made to a number of surrounding towns. Extensive outreach to the public was done by newspaper stories in the Hingham Journal, posted public meetings, and the town website. The town citizens were encouraged to contribute ideas and attend the committee meetings. The proposed bylaw, consistent with the original charge, reflects the need and desire for a conservative and consistent approach to naming public lands and buildings, which preserves the history of the town and invites citizen participation in the meeting via a majority vote at the annual town meeting. It goes on to say, the proposed naming bylaw designates the annual town meeting as the ultimate decision maker. It also references that a renaming proposal would need to be developed should there be what was called exceptional circumstances. And as I read all that, and I thought about some of the discussion that I heard a couple of weeks ago, it struck me that we've been kind of using, as we've been talking about this, we've been saying, let's kind of tweak the existing bylaw to accommodate this new development in the town. And I think in theory, we're all kind of thinking, yeah, that's a good idea. As I thought about it, I started to realize that I'm not sure that it's just a tweak to the bylaw. I think that as we're considering this notion, some of the very fundamental aspects of of what was adopted in 2010 are going to come into play. Should town meeting have the final say in naming? I've said publicly that there are parts of that make me really uncomfortable, but that's the way it is right now. Right now, the bylaw says that only individuals can be named. We can't name, there are no corporate naming, and you can't be living. And, do we want to change that? Maybe we do. I'm open to changing it, but as I think about that, I realize that the scope of the work that would need to be done, I think would require a lot of time and effort to make the right case to town meeting. And frankly, this has been a sensitive topic in the community. We all know that. And to me, if we're going to have a discussion about modifying a bylaw, I want it to be when we can put our best work forward in a really constructive way, because I think we all know that if something is not ready for prime time at town meeting, it's really hard to recover from that. I think about the noise bylaw a few years ago when the first draft of that started coming before committees, and it was just clear that it hadn't gotten enough visibility, and everybody was up in arms, and the committee was frustrated, and it was kind of a tough recovery, and I don't want to see that happen with something like this, because it's important and it's emotional. And so, as I'm thinking about this, I would say that sort of two things. One is that with respect to a charge, I think it would be helpful to have it be more specific. I think it needs to include things like what sort of naming standards might we have? Are we saying yes or no to a commercial organization? Yes or no to living persons? Yes or no to families? What sort of funding levels are associated with naming? I mean, I think about, my son's a student at Stonehill College, and my guess is that somewhere at Stonehill College, there's a piece of paper that says, if this level of donation, this is the kind of building you get named after you. There's some sort of relationship there that I think would have to get worked out. I think what's the approval process? Do we still want it to go to town meeting or not? And I would also say that if we're contemplating changing it to perhaps be, living people or families, I think there needs to be some sort of a removal process. What if you have the Jeffrey Epstein whatever, and I fully support doing all the work to do all this. I think we got to do it right, and we got to do it thorough. My concern is that to do this between now and the April 2020 town meeting, I think is a really tall order. And I would worry that in an effort to get it done for this year's town meeting, it wouldn't have the visibility and the socializing, and I think it might be unsuccessful. So I have no problem creating a charge, appointing a committee, but I'd recommend that committee report back at the 2021 town meeting so that we can take the appropriate time to really get this right. I don't disagree with, again, I think private fundraising could be beneficial. I'd just like to do it right. And I worry that if we try to rush this, there could be unintended consequences that could cause it to go awry. And so that's kind of where I am.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
I fully agree with that. My concern with the charge as I originally saw it, it was focused only on private-public partnerships. And I think that's an important aspect, but if that's the only charge, it may send an unintended signal that that's the priority, and that we really are not concerned with looking at historic events and people, or dealing with people who've made exceptional contributions, whether they're living or deceased. And I want to make sure that we're not alienating one group by only focusing on the donation side. Because I think that's important, and I think it will succeed if we have a unified front rather than division. People think, well, my interests were not focused on, so I'm not going to support this. I really think that this is important to the town. I am receptive to having a review of the naming bylaw to make sure that we're accomplishing whatever changes are needed so that the best interests of the town are being advanced. I know that there are some folks here for public comment, because one of the things that's important moving forward is to understand how important naming rights are with respect to fundraising for the town. And I know there's some anecdotes about that, but it'd be helpful to hear, for me to hear from members of the public what their experience is so that we understand the priority that should be placed here. One of the concerns that I have is that if there are one or two pressing projects where there are time constraints, if there's a way that we can consider those on their own and in tandem move forward with revisions to the naming bylaw. If there are no pressing time constraints, that's a moot issue. But I just want to be sensitive so that if there's a fundraising opportunity that is presented to the town now, if we don't act on it within the next couple months, it'll be lost. And I don't want to lose that opportunity. So if in fact that's the case, I'm thinking, for example, and I don't know if this is the case, the country club for the swimming pool, if that's a pressing situation that we need to act on now, then I'd like to have a discussion about whether or not that's necessary, or whether we can go through the more deliberate process that the that reviewing the entire naming bylaw would entail.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And so, like, when I presented this, my intent was to leave the bylaw intact with respect to municipal buildings and lands. So totally town-funded buildings and lands would just stay within the bylaw as drafted. And so because I was thinking, okay, I know this is going to be a sensitive topic, so let's, to your point, Mary, let's sort of take the narrow view of what I've been hearing, I think what we've all been hearing in terms of being able to adequately fundraise to support the capital projects or pieces of the capital projects that people are out there at our direction fundraising for. And so, I thought there ought to be a way to just leave that alone, fully funded municipal projects remain under the bylaw, and we could create this separate category where, some percentage or some portion of, all or a component of a project could fall under kind of a separate analysis. I am more than happy to go back and look at the whole thing. More than happy to do that. But that was my thought process for this, was we were being asked I thought we were being asked a particular question or told about a particular impediment to fundraising. And so, and in particular, I think you raised it, which is if you're going to fundraise, you're fundraising mainly from families and folks in town and local corporations, and in an effort to recognize their contributions and say thank you, it would be nice to have, at least as an option, the ability to name after those entities. And the way the bylaw is currently drafted, nobody has any ability to do that under the current bylaw. But I'm more than happy to.
I'm not sure, so as I understand the bylaw, you can't name a building. The Board of Selectmen has the authority to put up plaques to in fact, recognize contributions. So, I think we need to understand what the need is, and to the extent that we have the authority now
I don't think.
to address it.
Well, we don't have the authority to name a public building or land after a living person
Right.
or a commercial
Right,
enterprise
but
in
if-
any case.
But if I guess the question in my mind is what's the impediment and what are the implications on the bylaw? Because I guess, I'm struggling with this kind of notion, and that's where the conversation you guys had a few weeks ago was helpful to me, because I'm having trouble understanding how you can sort of carve out exceptions. I'm just, and exceptions maybe not the right word, but how you can carve this sort of circumstance out from the bylaw. And the other thing that I'm hearing anecdotally, and I will also say that in the last couple of weeks, I've heard from people who have expressed the opposite, who have said, hey, this, they have a different view. But if you think about what are some possible impediments, one is whether somebody is living or not, which is really core to, again, if you go back to that comment in the advisory, that was really core to what they were talking about. That was a real thing that they carved out. And again, that may not be appropriate anymore, but that was particular. And the other piece is, from what I'm hearing, is if you're out fundraising, what's an impediment right now is that you have somebody who'll say, well, I'm prepared to write a check for X amount, and you say, well, this is going to have to wait for our town meeting. And it's going to have to go in this very public session that gets very personal, and I get that. But again, if those are the impediments to public-private partnerships, if we were to alter that, we're really altering the bylaw. And again, that may be the right thing to do. I'm having trouble seeing how we can operate. Like, I think there has to be a certain amount of consistency in how we operate as a town, because we can't say, well, if I was giving money to the country club, I get to do X, but if I'm giving money to something else, I can't.
All right, that's not what I'm saying.
No,
and I'm not disagreeing with you. So I am happy to open up a fulsome review of the bylaw. I was just trying to let you know what my thought process was.
Sure.
In presenting what I presented for just this kind of discussion.
Yeah, and
So-
I'm just trying to kind of react to some of that, because I think some of the discussion that we're having is going to help us figure out the right path forward, because I think we're all in agreement that private fundraising is helpful to the town. The existing bylaw may have some limitations.
Right.
And I think there's a consensus on the board that we'd like to try to put together some volunteers to study it. I think what we're trying to figure out is, what do we want to do? How quickly do we want to go? So I think there's 80% common ground here.
Yeah, and, I mean, you're right, Mary, and I think there's policy recommendations that I would look for from a committee. So, for example, if a project costs $10 million and someone's writing a check for $2 million or $3 million, that means the town is going to be funding $7 million or $8 million. Does the $2 million name get attached to the building, and is that appropriate for then the town to be paying the rest? And I think for fundraising purposes, that information needs to be out, because if someone's going to make a contribution for $2 million with an expectation that they get the naming rights, and we say, no, that's not consistent with town policy, I don't want to pull the rug out from the people who are doing the fundraising. So we need to establish those policies.
They
And I guess-
need clarity.
Well, and I think there may be sort of a couple of levels of this, that which gets codified in a bylaw that can be, that can have a longer life, and there may be some fundraising or naming or gift agreement kind of policy that becomes part of our standard operating procedure, to your point, Mary, and in some ways maybe twofold, right? Because gift naming agreements end up being, sort of quasi-contractual. So, I think it's important for donors to understand, if we wanted to put, for instance, a useful life limitation in a gift agreement, that might be one of the things that gets reflected in the bylaw, like, gift agreements could or should include, any or all of the following. Reputational risk, I think, is particularly important for a municipality to reflect. I guess I'm a little concerned about the specificity, and maybe over the course of the week, we can kind of come to some agreement about the charge itself. I'm a little concerned about narrowly directing this group. I think, to me, it would be, sort of the review of the bylaw, that might include the following, or that should include the following aspects. And then I think that the committee should actually report back here before it goes anywhere else. Like, I think it's our committee,
Yep.
and I think it should come back here.
I agree.
And frankly, I'd like some sort of interim reporting, and maybe we can figure that out once the committee's appointed. But, I hear you and I agree with you. I think that it's, that particularly in this town, with the history of the genesis of the naming bylaw, I think changes to the naming bylaw will be a sensitive topic. So I agree that it needs to be metric-driven, it needs to be socialized, but I also think we can have some pace to it. Maybe not for this town meeting, but I don't want it to linger, I guess is what I'm saying. And part of the reason I don't want it to linger is I think that it would be helpful to have this objective decision, or objective conversation, apart from any particular project or any particular donor. Because and I think I said last time around, I also agree that I think an evaluation of town meeting as the decider for certain of the projects, I find that potentially to be a cumbersome vehicle for these more nimble kind of conversations.
And I would add that, right now, the bylaw calls for the Historic Commission to make a recommendation, because again, I think when this was put together, it was going to be people who are no longer living, so I think the focus was different. To the extent that we start having private donations and major donors in town, again, that approval process might be different.
Yeah.
No disrespect to the Historic Commission, but there may be certain instances where there's a different body that should, take a look at it. I like your idea of kind of interim reporting, because it also gives visibility, it gives a chance to shape things, people aren't surprised, how the charge is put together. I think what you're saying makes some sense. I actually looked back, and it took the board that put this together the first time, they discussed the charge over like 3 or 4 meetings, because I think they had conversations like this, and it kind of evolved.
Yep. Okay.
I just want to, I may be reading the bylaw in a way that you do not, but the restrictions with respect to naming of buildings or renaming buildings and whether or not someone is alive or deceased does not limit this board with respect to what are called features. Benches, bricks, flagpoles, plaques, parking spaces, trees, scoreboards, and signs or other markers located on public lands or within public buildings. And this board has the specific authority under the last section to, after a duly advertised public meeting, establish standards and specifications for signs, plaques, markers, or other features to be erected on public property within the town.
I don't disagree with you on
Right,
that.
so that to the extent that that would be helpful in fundraising efforts going on now, I'd like to know if that would be helpful, and if so, we should act on it.
Certainly. My reaction to it is the features elements are so small that it's, we could certainly take it as a to-do. I just don't know that if we're going to embrace this larger effort, I think my thought process would be, let's go through this planning and see if we get a particular request, great. But I guess I wouldn't want to undertake thinking about signs, plaques, markers, or other features while this larger effort's going on.
And just my experience with nonprofits is a big plaque when you walk into a building acknowledging donors has been very successful, and I would not want to discount that.
Mary, anything else?
No. I know there are people here who I think want to
Okay.
participate.
I'll remember this time. Questions or comments from the public? Anybody out there? Warren, if you could come to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Warren Palisare, 682 Main Street. Let me give you a little bit of history as to how I got involved in the fundraising efforts. It was all by mistake. I was part of the St. John Nursery School Board, and at the time, it was just to manage 2 events, Touch a Reptile and Touch a Truck. They brought in about $482 on a yearly basis to St. John's Nursery School. It was fantastic. That was my job. I was in charge of fundraising. Interesting enough, the St. John's asked us to leave St. John's, and we had to actually fundraise. So I was in charge of fundraising, almost $1 million to move that nursery school to where it is right now. And I realized at the time that even if we expanded Touch a Truck and Touch a Reptile tremendously, it was not going to be enough. So we put together a pretty advanced looking at fundraising and naming rights and looking for what the right mix was. Long story made short, we were able to fundraise about $250,000 in the first 6 months. And that allowed us to go to the bank to get a bank loan for a portion of the rest of the money. Once we got the bank loan, we're able to fundraise even more. That was all private fundraising, so there was no public part of that. And it's important to understand that I learned because I had to. I had to learn this because there was no real teacher out there. There was no one to inform me or anyone else on that committee how to properly fundraise and how to get the school built for our kids. And by the way, at that point in time, mercifully, my kids were already, I think, in high school at that time. But long story made short, that allowed me to move on to different positions. And I moved on to be a proud member of HSP, and then eventually became president of HSP. HSP, Hingham Sports Partnership, took to heart the need for fields in the town. And we put together a very, HSP had the primary role of fundraising for those fields in the town. This is the first public-private partnership really that the town had. And we looked at the bylaws. And Joe, no offense, but a plaque on a huge field is getting us nothing. So what was hamstringing us during that time, and it was the town knew and the town officials knew that we were being hamstrung by the fact that the bylaw was passed, and Christine Smith is here and still has a tick to this day, because it was passed as a knee-jerk reaction to the naming of the East School. It was specifically passed with the language that you see in here, which is so retards our efforts in fundraising, that when you take the things that we can't do, we can only go to dead people. We can't go to living people, we can't go to corporations. That's a very difficult thing, from a naming process and from a positioning process. And Mary, you know, I understand that this needs to be a very wide process, and I agree with that. I think we should take it all on. But I asked you last year before town meeting, can we bring it up this year? And you had a lot of capital concerns before town meeting last year.
Warren, I'm going to ask that we kind of stick to the...
Oh, okay. The fact is that this is not a new topic. It's not a new topic. It's something that has been brought up in the past. And that's nothing against you, Mary. It's just that this, I don't want to make it seem like this is brand new and has to do with the pool. It has to do with the fact that our town has limited the fact that we want to see positive private-public fundraising happen, and we also want to make sure that, and you said something that I totally agree with, Mary, that we don't want the town meeting making decisions. We want as much, we want the naming policy to be as strong as it possibly can, so we avoid bringing up people's names in public or bringing to vote at town meeting, you know, things that are going to be controversial. We want the naming policy to be such that everything, as much as we possibly can be answered. And I think that putting together a committee right now is showing the town, it's showing, you know, all the efforts that are going on right now, that the selectmen are really concerned about this matter and want to put a committee to action to look at this as potential changes. And, you know, it could very well be that the committee comes back and says, hey, we got it right back then. I don't know. I think we have to be open to understanding what we've learned in 10 years and the way that the scene has changed in fundraising, and also what our needs are in this town. So,
I just have a question, because you've got experience in fundraising in the nonprofit world. Are there distinctions between nonprofits and a government in terms of making contributions or doing fundraising that you would share with us that would help make this process a little easier?
The great part about fundraising privately is that individual questions can be answered quickly, because you typically have a board that can address a one-off question, It's very difficult to do in, something like this, to bring it to the selectmen, bring it to town meeting, to go through overrides. The public part of this, Joe, is just a difficult process. We realize that, but, I don't think that the original authors of the 2010 bylaw could have imagined the sort of, opportunities slash capital projects that are ahead of us going into the future, and the need to recruit others that are, behind me and Hoffy and other people that are trying to, we want to get other people that want to be involved in these public-private partnerships.
And I think to Joe's point, I think one of the, one of the differences is you're talking about taxpayer money. So in private philanthropy with private boards, people are self-selecting into that, and you certainly have a fiduciary responsibility with respect to those assets, and you have transparency requirements with respect to those assets. We have a different level of fiduciary responsibility with respect to the taxpayer dollars that underwrite, all of the assets in the town.
Absolutely.
And so, that's why it's entirely appropriate that, town meeting opines on the rules of the road with respect to, naming these buildings. So, I think that's the balance of creating rules that essentially town meeting saying, which it does in a number of bylaw cases, right? I'm going to delegate my authority to act as the legislative body, me, town meeting. I'm going to delegate that pursuant to these expectations. And I think that's the evolution of the practice around private support for municipal projects isn't reflected in that 2010 conversation. And admittedly, I think I said last time around, I talked to a member of the bylaw committee who said just that, and I think Mary raised it earlier. It wasn't as big a part of our conversation as it is now, and at the magnitude that it is now. So, I think that's an aspect of the review that the committee is going to have to keep in mind, is that, it's not just nonprofit assets, it's taxpayer assets.
I agree, Karen. I also think that we should write into the minutes that if a committee is formed in 2019, we should look at this again in 2029. It just, there's so much that has changed. That committee did a great job for what they were charged to do. That's nothing against what they did. It's just taking a look at what the road looks like today, and it looks a lot different.
Thank you. Did you have a comment?
I just feel the need to clarify something, because I think that some of my comments were mischaracterized, and I take exception to them. Last year at a meeting at the Country Club, when I was giving a capital presentation, this topic has come up, and Mr. Pelletier is correct that last year, I don't know, it was around this time, that there was discussion about the fact that the naming bylaw was an impediment, and I don't disagree with that. What I suggested at that time was it didn't have to do with other capital projects. I don't know if people are referring to the water company or something else. What I said at that time, and I said all along the way, was that I asked that any discussion about revising the naming bylaw hold off until after the superintendent of schools retired, out of courtesy to a 56-year employee. That was the reason that this board hasn't taken it up since then. It didn't have to do with capital projects. It didn't have to do with anything else. And it bothers me that we even have to go there tonight. And I hope we can focus this conversation on the task ahead of us, because I think we have a lot of agreement in this room.
Fair enough. Any other comments from the public? Bill?
Hi, William Friend, 704 Main Street. And I'm here not speaking as a member of the CCMC, but as somebody that served on a number of charitable boards and on community and statewide organizations. And even as a member of a large family trust. I was an attorney representing a large family trust. And I would say first that I do think that not having the naming rights is an impediment, but it is more clearly, it is a carrot. It's a clear carrot, and I can speak when I was on the large family foundation that the family was very much interested in getting recognized for every big donation that they made. And I can also say that I was here in Massachusetts, I was on the board of the New England Wildlife Center, and we named that the new hospital over in Weymouth after a family here in this town. And I also am aware that the pools in Norwell and Quincy are named after another family in this town. So I think the families in this town do want to have naming rights, and I think it is a good carrot, and that's all I wanted to say.
You know, I will say, in my experience, I've talked to donors who typically have donated on an anonymous basis, and sometimes the reason they allow themselves to be recognized, frankly, is to set an example for other people. So, gentleman in particular said, I always made my donations anonymously because I knew I was doing what I wanted to do in my heart, but they were convinced that, you know, look, if that person can do it, I can do it. And to your point about sort of building a pipeline of support for the municipality, I think this is a way, that form of recognition signals to people that, you know, that these folks are investing in the community, and, you know, you ought to think about it too.
I was on the board of Boy Scouts in Ohio, and we were trying to build a camp, and that camp didn't happen until we told them we would name the camp after the name of the family that made the biggest contribution. And so that's all I wanted to say.
Oh, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ray, did you have a comment?
Good evening, Ray Estes, 92 Fort Hill Street. So I'm wearing a couple of hats this evening.
You're not wearing a single hat.
And I would expect nothing less, by the way.
I'm here on behalf of Hingham Sports Partnership to just formally thank the board for considering this and to let you know that the HSP is behind this endeavor, and we look forward to it progressing as soon as possible. On a personal note, Joe, you mentioned you were interested in folks' experience,
yes,
and impediments and things of that nature in fundraising. So I worked with some folks in the room on the Fields project. The fundraising was a huge challenge, and I would say that the impediment of the bylaw was significant during that process, and there were a number of large donors, and I think that there could have been more donors and more larger donors if the bylaw was not structured the way it is. I understand the reasons why it was put into place at the time. I'm appreciative of what we were able to do within the confines of the bylaw, but I think it does present significant impediments, particularly when you're talking about a project that clearly has limited town resources, and essentially, in order to get critical components built, it's got to seek private fundraising. So I would hope that those issues would be taken into account by this new committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from anybody on this tonight? All right. Any further comments from my colleagues? So what I'm hearing, I guess, is maybe we could all give a little thought to the components of the charge. And what's today, Tuesday? In addition to vote next week? Oh, you're not here? Okay.
When's our next scheduled meeting?
With all three members will be the 10th, I believe, December 10th.
December? Okay. Yeah, it just seems like it.
Could we maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, but could we give components of a charge and perhaps ask Tom or Michelle to try to aggregate some of that and to maybe use the time to kind of run that by us, to identify, to kind of see if they can come to consensus.
Over those 2 weeks?
Right.
Yeah, I don't think we have any other choice,
And
really.
I think we had talked about a committee of 5, and I know we've had a few applications that would also give an opportunity for other interested citizens to put their names forward.
Yep. So, but I guess I would like to be in a position to vote and to appoint on that, on the 10th.
I think on the appointment side, this board should consider if we want to ask other committees to participate, to designate someone to sit on this group so that we make sure we have appropriate representation, someone from Historic or, I'm not sure what, or the planning board, I mean, whether or not we want to.
Or, I mean, I think the other way that gets built in, right, is part of the charge to say you need to go around to these various stakeholders.
Sure.
And I'm really concerned about creating a big committee that's not going to be able to move with some expediency on this.
Yep.
Notwithstanding the fact that I'm not rushing to judgment,
Sure.
but I guess my preference still is to ask 5 members. We had 5 members before, but that we could certainly express
Sure.
our desire that, you know, all stakeholders, school committee, historic,
Right.
planning board, zoning board, all, you know, everybody,
Yep.
anybody who touches this should be part of the committee's deliberations.
Yeah, I mean, my intention there is, as I said it before, I don't want there to be a constituency that feels they've been excluded from the process,
Yep.
because that's just going to come back to haunt us.
Yep.
So I want to be as inclusive and address the issues so that when we come up with a proposal, it's welcomed by the community.
Yep, I agree with that.
Well, perhaps as we get talent bank applications
Yeah.
in, all 3 of us can look and see if there appears to be a gap. We can all do some outreach
Yes.
to make suggestions, make phone calls to see if people are interested.
Yep.
Yeah, great idea.
Okay, so, charge thoughts to Tom and Michelle
This week.
this week, so it gives you an opportunity then to circulate that stuff, to sort of aggregate it and take the temperature of the group. And then in the meantime, I know we got an additional talent bank application in today, try to build out who those appointments are. And again, I think we'd need to discuss those with you, but I'd really like to be in a position to vote the charge and make the appointments and
On the 10th.
on the 10th. Yep.
Just, you know, one other point, I mean, that sort of, to me, initially got lost is, this is an incredible conversation, because what we're talking about is people who want to contribute to the town and make the town better. It's like, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is incredibly positive for the town, and we're just trying to find the right road so that we can all move together and make this happen.
Right, I agree with that. Yep. Okay, anything further on that?
Nope.
Moving on. We've got appointments, I think we have one tonight. I would entertain a motion to appoint Robert Edson as the resident in a historic district alternate member to the Historic Districts Commission to fill a 3-year term ending on June 30, 2022.
So moved?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And we've got a couple other votes tonight. So I've had a chance, one involves the HHSRA use of the building at 308 Cushing Street. I've had conversations with both Tom and Michelle. I do think that we need to vote to allow them to submit this request for a special permit, A1. I don't know whether you have any questions or further discussion on that.
I just want to make sure I understand. So what we are voting, not to say they're entitled to anything, but simply to authorize them to
Yes.
make the application to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit.
Because you're the property owner.
Right.
Yep, good,
And I'm satisfied with that.
good clarification.
Yep, and I had a conversation with Michelle, I don't know, about a week and a half ago, just outlining some things like, you know, access to the building and hours and snow removal and, you know, nothing that's an impediment, but just making sure that
Yep.
expectations are clear.
Yep.
Yes,
I agree.
absolutely.
Someone like to make a motion?
Make a motion to authorize the Hingham High School Rowing Association to submit a special permit A1 application to the Zoning Board of Appeals to use 308 Cushing Street for boat maintenance and their winter erging program.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you, Jeff.
The 99 is back. I'm still bitter, I'd like to go on the record.
Never got invited to their grand opening.
Yeah. They went through the remodel, nothing, it was crickets. So change in beneficial interest, so this is one of those up the chain corporate changes that then needs to get reflected in their license? Is that the deal? Exactly. Okay. And I'm assuming the paperwork's all in order? Yep. Good old Sharon Perfetti.
You're here.
Any questions on that one?
I don't.
Mary? Nope. All right, I'd entertain a motion.
Comment?
Oh, public comment. Any public comment on the 99?
No.
And their failure to invite me to their grand opening?
Okay, I move to approve the request of 99 Restaurants of Boston LLC, doing business as a 99 Restaurant and Pub, for a change of officer and change of beneficial interest, as outlined in the letter from the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission dated October 11, 2019. The commission has reviewed this transaction and found it to be consistent with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 138.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and we've got a one day. So this is for the Downtown Association and the event Miracle on Main Street. I saw that the chief had some concerns, but he's addressed them with the applicant, it sounds like. It's all set? Okay, thank you. Joe, any questions?
Nope.
Mary?
Would you like a motion?
Yes, I would.
Make a motion to approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Lynn Barclay on behalf of Hingham Downtown Association for Miracle on Main Street, to be held at St. John the Evangelist on Thursday, December 5th, 2019, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Now, is this the Miracle on Main Street they made a movie of? Is that? Maybe not.
Different Main Street,
Okay.
maybe. Ms. Montague, anything tonight?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Nothing? All right. Tom?
Not tonight.
Okay. Joe?
I do. The Hingham Farmers Market. I'm sure folks are familiar with the farmers market. It offers to the public a rich array of locally produced or grown products, focusing on primary or value-added food products. The bad news is that the last day of the season is scheduled for this Saturday, November 23rd, from 9 to 1. The good news is that there will be a Hingham Winters Farmers Market. Mark Cullings and his crew have finalized an agreement with the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. The Visitor Center at Wompatuck State Park will be the new home for the Hingham Winter Farmers Market. The market will be open and active every Saturday morning beginning January 4th during the months of January, February, and March. The hours will be 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And those of you who are not familiar with the Visitor Center at Wompatuck State Park and you need an address to plug into your GPS, that address is 204 Union Street in Hingham. I've spoken with Mark, and I've spoken with several of the vendors, and they're all very grateful to the Department of Conservation and Recreation for the care and attention they received from the DCR officials. The vendors are very excited for this new opportunity for the Hingham's Farmers Market, and they are looking forward to seeing all of us and all of you this winter. That's my report.
That's great. That is really great news. That's it?
Yes.
Mary?
A couple of things. So this morning, if you were on Hingham announcements, you'll know that the town has started to collect ideas for the name of the new water company. So this is an effort. We are taking recommendations until December 2nd. If you go to the Hingham website, you can go online and submit a recommendation. You can also visit the town clerk's office in Hingham, Hull, or Cohasset, and there is a paper submission form. The Transition and Evaluation Committee is going to gather all of the ideas. They're going to cull the list down. They're going to give it to us as water commissioners because we will get to make the ultimate decision. I spoke to Chair Jim Taylor a couple hours ago, and they have already gotten 25 responses.
Get out of here.
And so we really do encourage, and we're also asking people not just what you would suggest, but why. And that is, I think that will be helpful. Along the lines of water, Tom and Jim Taylor and I will be attending the Select Board meeting in Hull on Thursday night. We will be giving the Hull Select Board and Town Manager an update on what's been taking place, and we're grateful to Jim Taylor for coming with us for that. Last Tuesday, Tom and I went to the advisory committee meeting and walked through the same capital presentation that we reviewed a few weeks ago. We had a really good conversation with the advisory committee. They had a lot of great questions and comments. And tomorrow, not so much in my capacity as a selectman, but as a member of the Hingham Women's Club, I'm going to be helping with the Women's Club annual Senior Thanksgiving Luncheon. And that's taking place in the Senior Center, and I would just give a shout out to the Hingham Women's Club. They do so many wonderful things in the community, but at the holidays they particularly shine with the senior luncheon, gifts for the homeless. It used to be called the Festival of Trees. I know it's called something different now, but all of the proceeds of that going to charities and organizations around the South Shore. So really appreciate the efforts of all of its members. And that's it.
Great. A couple things from me. Tom, Michelle, and I were with the school committee and advisory committee and members of the administration on Saturday to discuss Foster School. We are looking forward with crossed fingers to December 11th, which is when the MSBA will issue its decisions with respect to our participation in that funding program for Foster School. But I thought it was I actually thought it was a great discussion, and it's nice to be able to gather with colleagues from the different sort of entities that touch these projects along the way so that we're all on the same page. And again, I thought it was well attended and a great opportunity to talk about that facility. I met with, Randy Sylvester and I met with Cleaner Greener Hingham to talk about enhanced recycling education and also their participation in the carbon neutrality proposal that the Energy Action Committee will undertake. It was a really great discussion. Those folks have been committed to recycling and other waste reduction efforts in Hingham, and we appreciate their service. And to that end, Steve Messinger gave a tour to the Boy Scouts, I guess, of the transfer station, including the recycling center. And one of the things that came out in the discussion at Cleaner Greener Hingham was really the importance of influencing the younger kids in town about proper recycling efforts. So it all comes full circle. I'd say that there's a couple other opportunities to join the visioning session for the Master Plan Commission, I think tomorrow and Saturday maybe. Is that right? I saw that a bunch of Hingham High School students were helping Scott McMillan clean up in Bear Cove Park. A lot of brush was loaded up, and I know that that organization or that entity runs on a very limited budget, so depends heartily on the assistance of volunteers, so I appreciate the efforts of our high school students to help with that. And last but not least, my colleagues and I were at the annual Veterans Day celebration at Town Hall on the 11th. Leading up to that, the schools in town all had their own Veterans Day celebrations. Linden Ponds had its Veterans Day celebration, and that culminated in our celebration on the 11th. We're all so proud to live in this town, but that is one of the very, very special days to be in Sanborn Auditorium and gather with our veterans community to celebrate their service and recognize their sacrifice. We were joined this year by U.S. Representative Stephen Lynch, who gave an address and also presented a proclamation to the new Veteran of the Year, which is Dave Sargent. It was a really special event. We heard from Colonel Wayne Libby, who is our principal speaker. Colonel Libby's had a distinguished career, including as part of the 1058 as a platoon leader here right in Hingham. So I will share one little anecdote with you. You know, you can imagine Representative Lynch had many places to be on Veterans Day, and we were honored that he joined us, particularly because we asked him to refrain from speaking at our town meeting this year, but he wasn't bitter at all about that. But he joined us, and, you know, Keith German, who is our Veteran Service Officer, leaned over to him after he had made his initial remarks, and he said, listen, Representative, we really appreciate you being here, and if you need to go, we've appreciated your presence. And Representative Lynch looked out in that auditorium and said, are you kidding me? I'm in for the long haul. It just really impressed him, I think, the attendance by people and the ritual and the ceremony, and again, our embracing of our veterans community. So I salute all the folks that were involved in that, and in particular, the members of the Hingham High School band that were there early on a holiday, and the Hingham High School Veterans Appreciation Club that shows up at so many of these events. And you all don't know it, but that's really adds a dimension to these celebrations that's important for the town. So I think that's it for me.
I would just add one further comment. There were many speeches at that Veterans Day event, but to me, one of the highlights was the speech that the chairman of the Board of Selectmen gave. It was inspiring, and it made me very proud to be part of this board.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. And on that note, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Good night.
Good night. Good night.